means that you get a lot of attention as an undergrad if you want it and you want to be in small seminar type classes. There are bigger, pack the halls kind of classes, including very, very, very popular coursework. Back in the day, Ec 10, that's economics, used to pack the halls, as well as justice, which is available now on like edX and other platforms. But roughly the majority of classes, like over 70%, have classes with less than 20 students, if that's your jam. And the SAT range happens to be anywhere from 1480. This is the 75th percentile, is 1480 to 1580. But I always say in previous webinars, please don't let that, deter you if you really want to apply and those are not your test scores, because we're judging you based on your local context and your local curriculum. So if everyone around you is not doing as well and you're doing very well, then you should submit your score. And then the ACT range is pretty much near perfect. It's 33 through to 36. And the average high school GPA is 3.9, which again is pretty much close to perfect. Okay, so here are things that make Harvard a little bit different than Stanford. So it is the most well-known university in the world, even though Stanford comes, I think, a very close first, and has students from over 150 countries. Only Stanford can compare with Harvard in the quality of its graduate programs alongside the undergrad programs. They're both incredibly strong. And students can cross-enroll in courses from the medical school, the business school, the law school. And that's actually a really nice feature if you get further along in your coursework and that's what you want to do. You have to petition for it though. And then Harvard students have over 450 organizations that they can get involved with. The campus is very, very, very active. And over 42 varsity sports. It's the most of any college. There's a lot of variety. There's no such thing as they don't have a thing for what I want to do, because then you can just make it. Stanford, on the other hand, I've been reading all about the history of the railroads, and the Stanfords, that's how they made their fortunes. So the California Senator Leland Stanford and his wife Jane founded the farm based on the principles of promoting public welfare by exercising an influence and benefit of humanity and civilization. And I would say that it is pretty much fulfilled on that mission. So Stanford is in Palo Alto, which is roughly 35 miles south of San Francisco. It was one of the largest campuses in the US. It's massive. You kind of need a bike to get around. And it's got 18 interdisciplinary research institutes and 7 schools on a single campus. So the most popular majors are computer science and engineering, no surprise, followed by social sciences and math and statistics. And then, you can make up your own interdisciplinary study major as well. So actually a lot of interdisciplinary majors are really, really, really common and popular. They used to have a CS plus X. So it's the CS plus French, whatever you want to make of it. Or you can do a minor in education and a major in sociology or something. The student faculty ratio is equally low. At Harvard it was 7-1. At Stanford it's 5-1. And very similar to Harvard, they have about 70% or 68% of classes with fewer than 20 students. And their SAT and ACT range is pretty much very similar to Harvard as well, almost perfect. So anywhere from 1470 to 1570. The ACT range is 34 to 35. It's not much of a range, but that's getting up to the perfect scores. And then again, their GPA or average high school GPA is 3.9, which is again almost on the perfect end. Okay, so what makes it different? I think that Stanford is really into students who are quirky and independent and are not afraid to take risks and will break things, meaning disrupt things. We sit in the heart of Silicon Valley. And because of that, I think that we're really willing to entertain ideas and people who are saying that they want to do something that's out of the norm, a little bit out there, and will be very different than what the current industry looks like. So because of that reason, I think we produce more company founders than any other college in the world. So Stanford alumni have founded or co-founded Google, Nike, Netflix, Instagram, PayPal, and nearly 1,000 other companies. So So even though it's a lot newer than almost every Ivy League, it's really established itself as a very competitive, very reputable institution, ranking higher than most Ivies, both nationally and globally. And I think a lot of that is because they're very innovative and they're very open to thinking very differently. Both you'll see it from the moment you get on campus. It looks different. When you ask them for things, they're very willing to take a risk on a venture that you care about. And if you want to start something, that they're on board with you. So the only reason why the Ivy League is named as such is because of an athletic conference. I don't know if you guys knew that. So the West Coast Ivy, which is what Stanford gets sometimes called, its reputation has also upheld in terms of the athletics, because I think we have more Olympians than probably any other college. Oh, second only to USC. So we've got 307 Olympic medals, and USC has 309. I'm pretty sure that's probably going to be overturned very, very shortly. I was just reading yesterday, for example, that 5 former Stanford soccer players are now in the World Cup team. So there you go. And then let's talk about some similarities between the two schools. So they're both tied nationally at number 3 alongside Yale. Because of our robust academic programs, the top-notch faculty, the stellar research opportunities, and of course, the renowned graduate schools. We're both knee blind for US students. Stanford is not knee blind for international students. So they join a really small pool of 115 post-secondary institutions that don't consider your financial status when you're making admissions decisions. But for domestic students, they're knee blind. So they're both coastal. That's really nice, I think, about both campuses, and they're both near mid-sized cities. So Palo Alto is kind of a city, like it's definitely a city, but it's in close proximity to San Francisco or San Jose. Cambridge is its own thing. It's itself a little city, and it's really, really close to Boston. So Harvard is the oldest university and has educated 7 US presidents, while Stanford is home to 30 living billionaires and 17 current astronauts. Sorry, my a little bit frippity this morning, my speaking, because it's about 6 a.m. where I am. Okay, I'm going to head into Q&A and see if there's any questions that you have about Harvard and Stanford. So feel free to pop any questions that you have for me along the way. I love for things to be interactive, and I want to make sure that you get all of your questions answered as I go along. So does Harvard and Stanford both have undergrad programs of dermatology? They do it, not undergrad, they have it at the medical school, but I don't think they have that in the undergrad. And let's see. Okay, there's a question about getting research experience. We have Indigo Research. I think we're going to talk about that a little bit later on. So maybe you can listen in for when we start to go over some of the opportunities that Crimson can provide you. But they have a lot of different guidance and programs. Right,
Pam,
Ali?
I see that the Q&A, it's obviously very full. So I've actually got a question right here in front of me that pertains to what you've just covered, that might be a good one to answer before we move on. And it is, what are some truths about the top school admissions in general that you think are hard to digest?
Interesting question.
Yeah, I can read it again because it's a little bit. So some truths about top school admissions that in general that you think are hard to digest.
What does hard to digest mean?
I'm wondering the same. Yeah, maybe some, what I'm thinking of are maybe, the belief that admissions rates at these schools are so low that it's, not even worthwhile to try to apply, that type of thing. Or maybe, why some of these schools, like you said, Stanford, Princeton is another one that have stopped publishing their acceptance rates and admissions stats for, well, anyone could speculate on why they have stopped doing that, but that's what I'm thinking when I read that question.
So the reason why they stopped doing it is because, in part, a lot of people get very hung up on the rates of admission, and it's not something that they necessarily, they say, are proud of, that the numbers keep getting lower every single year, to the point where it's so low. They get made fun of a lot. That's like, oh, what? Is it going to go to 0.5% next year? So that's, I think, part of the reason. What are some other truths? Maybe, the person who asked that, Hasini, I think, could clarify that question a little bit, and then I'm super happy to answer more.
Right. One more question, I think, before we move on to the next section, and that is for STEM students, because surely there are a ton of them in this audience. For STEM students, which school do you think is better, Harvard or Stanford?
Both. They're both extremely strong for STEM. It depends on what kind of STEM you're thinking about. I would say if you're looking for computer science and entrepreneurship and engineering, Stanford. And if you're thinking about all else, both are incredibly strong. I think Harvard's strong all across the board. I think Stanford is really strong in STEM topics. Okay, so let's move on. We're going to go over some application basics. You guys would probably have seen this before, like in terms of the timeline. And at Crimson, we start building students from as early as eighth grade or even earlier. And you might be wondering, what would I be doing in eighth grade or ninth grade? You would be identifying and trying to figure out what your extracurricular strengths are. So you're exploring all of your interests. You're trying to figure out, okay, so in 10th and 11th grade, what can I hone in on in terms of my areas of excellence and my interests, and how can I go deeper? So I would say that, grades 8 to 10, you're exploring, you're trying to figure out, what am I good at? What do I enjoy? And then from then on out, you're hopefully strengthening them, going deeper, taking the SAT or the ACT, considering your narrative, your application as a whole. And then starting in 12th grade, which is what my seniors are doing right now, or they should be, they're deciding essay topics, they begin drafting and editing them. They're putting together their extracurriculars, their activities lists, their teacher letters of recommendation. They're going through their school list, their school deadlines, so the early round versus the regular round. And then later this year, when the decisions get released, we're going to be celebrating together. And, I'm going to be with them all the way up until they pack their bags and head off to Harvard, Stanford, or wherever they're going for the fall. So that's roughly the application timeline and how we support students from the very beginning all the way until you leave for college. And then in terms of the application weighting, a lot of people like knowing, well, what percentage is devoted to, academics or extracurriculars? So we roughly say it's about 40% of academics. And I always say academics are your foundation, meaning if you don't have strong academics, it's quite hard to get ahead into the other components. And it can offset weaker academics, but we always say it's the foundation. And then extracurriculars make up the next huge bucket of things that we look at. For example, your clubs, your sports, your hobbies, any projects you've initiated, anything else that you've done. Those are your extracurriculars. And then the personal category, which is your essays, the recommendations, the interviews, these all come out to make up the third portion of the application. Can you guys hear me okay? Or am I lagging a bit? Just want to see.
I can hear you well.
Okay, great. So let's talk about deadlines, because there's roughly two of them. There's the early round and then the regular round. So during the early round, you have two options. So one option is early decision. My colleague likes to say that this is kind of like marriage. So you have a favorite school, one dream school that perfectly aligns with all of your selection criteria. And if you choose this person and you get married to this college, then that's it, right? You're committing to them. So it gives you an extra boost of admissions if you want to be considered for that school. So ED schools tend to be pretty sensitive to yield, meaning they know that you're coming. So that's an added advantage. And that's why you have a much higher chance of being admitted. In early action, it's non-binding. So it allows the school to know that you are in the running and that they are probably your number one or number two or somewhere in the top of your list. And it gives you a slightly increased chance of being admitted. So a lot of students also ask me, well, what's the best way to demonstrate interest? And I always say, well, if you can get yourself organized and submit an application early, there's no better way to show a school that you care about them than applying in the early round. And then the regular decision makes sense is if, for example, maybe your application isn't as strong or you're trying to pick up some grades in your senior year, or you're finishing a major project and you're not quite ready to apply in the early round, then the regular round makes a whole lot of sense. And you might have also a lot of schools in your list that have a lot of different qualities and offerings that you like, but you don't have a clear number one. Then the regular decision round makes a whole lot of sense for you in terms of those preferences. So Harvard and Stanford both offer single choice early action and restrictive early action admissions plans, which just means that while they're not binding, you cannot apply early to any other private colleges, with the exception of schools like USC, where there is a scholarship component in the early round. So you can apply there early. But otherwise, you can only apply privately. So you can apply to them, Harvard and Stanford, single choice early action, and then other public EAs you can apply to as well in the early round. Okay, hopefully I haven't confused you with all of that. Any questions about anything that I've just gone over in terms of the application overview?
I've got a couple that I've been compiling because, again, I know the Q&A box is just flooded. So a couple of questions about, yes, this application timeline and strategy. One person is asking, what are some things that you should start thinking about during the summer before high school? So getting a really early start, summer before freshman year of high school. What are some things that should be on your mind if you are aiming for Ivy League schools?
So it depends on if you already know what you want to study. For example, my STEM kids, I tell them, you could get involved in science fair and science fair competitions early on, like in middle school. They have their own middle school version of things. And it also depends on what your other areas of interest are. But I tell my middle schoolers to start looking at summer programs if they can apply to them. There are some that are open to students that young. So again, that they can start to explore their interests. I also have a lot of middle schoolers who are already doing research as well in other topics, whether it's the humanities, history, anthropology, sociology, and they do those early on before high school starts. So I know that's quite daunting, but they're really into it. So
yeah, and perfect answer given that summer break has just begun for a lot of people. So great way to use the next, couple months of free time, or more free time anyways. So this question, it's a little bit to do with that previous section, but a little bit to do with this one as well. And that's kind of a general question about the benefits of going to an Ivy League school or Stanford, Harvard. What's the appeal? And kind of maybe you could chat a little bit also about building your school list in this answer.
So why apply to Harvard or Stanford at all? Or why apply there early?
No, why in general? What are the benefits of going to schools like these?
I would say that the exciting part for me was that I was always a kid who was really interested in ideas, and going to Harvard was extremely exciting because if you are really interested in learning and have endless questions, which I do or did, I felt that there was no one else in the world who could probably answer them better than the Harvard faculty, because they had a lot of the answers, and that turned out to be true. These are Nobel Prize laureates, so I was confident that if they didn't know the answer, then probably no one else in the world did either. It's very exciting to be amongst people who are at the top of the game, so at the top of their fields, and they really had all the answers that nobody else did. In terms of Stanford, I would say that it's incredibly exciting to be at Stanford because of all the opportunities available to meet your next co-founder. They really encourage that. They make the environment very friendly to collaborating across disciplines. And they, in fact, have many programs that do that. One of my favorite programs is something called Design for Extreme Affordability, where they take students from a ton of different schools, they bring them together, they send them to countries like Uganda or Rwanda, and you go and you solve a problem in that country as part of this team of from the design school. But it's people like who are biomedical engineers, they're people who are microbiologists, they're people who are historians coming together to solve this problem. I think that that best encapsulates what Stanford is like. They're really big into doing things a little bit differently, being very innovative in their approach to problem solving and trying to tackle the world's problems. They both do it to a large extent, but I would say that Stanford's very innovative in the sense that the way that they teach and think about things is very exciting. I don't know if that was too vague, but those are some reasons.
Got it. Okay. Well, I'm going to ask two questions specifically related to this section on application strategy. And then I want to be mindful of the time, so we'll move on after that. But first one is, kind of a narrower question about what you just answered, but what are the advantages of applying early? Why would you want to, apply with an earlier deadline versus waiting a little longer?
So in the early round, I always say there are fewer applicants, so you're up against fewer people. So in the early round, there might be so at schools like Santa Clara, they've got 300 and something in the early round, and then 47,000 in the regular round. So definitely the numbers are favoring you in the early round. Even at schools like Harvard and Stanford, the early round is a lot smaller. And remember, I will only have been reading for roughly 4 weeks. When you apply in November 1, I have until about December 1 to turn around a decision. And you're just going to stand out more in that pool than, if I've been reading and in the early round, I find a really exciting neuroscientist. In the regular round, I probably see 12, maybe more, thousands more. And so it's no longer exciting. So if you stand out in the early round and I've already admitted you, in the regular round, I might decide, I don't need to take any more neuroscientists. I've got a handful that I've already admitted. So those are some of the advantages to applying early.
Got it. And then one more question before we move on to our next section. And this is, does it look bad to apply as an undecided major? Would it be a better strategy to go in with a, declared major or focus of study?
Well, so Stanford asks you to put 3 on the application. So I'm not sure what you would put then if you had undecided as all 3. I guess you could do that. But in terms of them, I would say then your application doesn't really have a profile or a narrative. Unless your narrative is, well, I care about this, this, and this, in which case I would say whatever those things are, please put them down. So in short, them probably don't apply undecided. And then for Harvard, they're a little bit less stringent. They ask you, how confident are you that these are areas that you're interested in studying and that you'll be committing to down the line? So they give you a little bit more flexibility. But even with them, I would say justify it, right? If it's undecided, then tell me why. Is it because, again, you're deciding between 3 or 4 different fields and you can't tell which one you love the most? In which case, I'd probably just put down the 3 or 4 different fields. Okay, so let's move along to the next. I want to be mindful of time too, but I will definitely get to your questions. So let's talk about college admissions and what the schools are looking for. So Harvard says that we are looking for the best educators of one another and their professors. So living amongst your faculty, and we live in the housing system. So all of the houses have faculty and TAs and tutors and other residential tutors that you'll be living with. And that's very much a part of the housing system. You will interact with them. They're the people who overlook your course schedule. When I applied to medical school many years later, they were still the people who wrote my letters of recommendation. They still remembered me. So that really is like how close the housing system is. And they at Harvard, they very much think that a lot of your learning happens in the classroom, but just as much happens outside of the classroom in these interactions that you have with the community. And then at Stanford, they say, we want to understand how you as a whole person would grow, contribute, and thrive at Stanford, and how Stanford in turn wouldn't be changed by you. I really, really like that because I feel like that's very true, and that their students do a lot in terms of voicing their opinions and making them known. We just had a huge not a riot, but a big union thing that was going on with the graduate students. And I think Stanford has been changed by that unionized movement of graduate students. So I really like that they said that because I think it's true, and that they're willing to listen and be open to what students are saying and that they want. Okay, so the first cutting factor is looking at your academics to see who is going to be competitive enough to stand out. So Stanford says the primary criterion, so the number one thing, right, for admission to Stanford is academic excellence. We look for your preparation and potential to succeed. We expect you to challenge yourself throughout high school and to do very well. So they're not mincing their words here. They really are looking for the top of the top, if you can. So that means that they're looking at your course progression and relative to your school offerings. Did you take the most challenging coursework available? Did you self-study or take any subjects outside of school? And then amongst the academic solids, so meaning math, English, the social sciences and languages, did you get the best grades you possibly could? And was it the highest level of course that you could take? And then we're also going to pay attention to your unweighted GPA, your weighted GPA, as well as the class rank, if it's available to us. And then, of course, the standardized testing, if you choose to provide it, like the ACT or the SAT, or your AP scores, or the IB if you're on that curriculum. So top 10 worthy academics, or one of the top things are, so aim to be in the top 5 to 10% of your class. I think that's really important, no matter what school you're in. Take challenging coursework if available. You want to have breadth in terms of math, the sciences, the humanities, or the social sciences and languages. Those are what we call academic solids. And we're going to be looking at those very hard. We don't look at things like PE or journalism or ceramics or something like that. We will look at everything else. So we encourage students to take as many APs available to them as possible that make sense for their curriculum. And remember, you're going to be judged against your cohort. So meaning if your school has 27 APs and you took 17, you're probably maxing out. And if other people are doing more, then you're going to be judged against them. And then if you can take the SAT or ACT, take them. So despite test optional policies, we found that students who took and reported test scores had a much higher admit rate than those who did not. And make sure that if you're not getting the score that you want, you can also engage with expert tutors. We have a whole team of them. And then you're aiming for 1540 to 1580 testing range. And then you want to go above and beyond, because all students who apply and are successful at Harvard and Stanford have gone way beyond the extra mile. You want to undertake research if you can, take extra coursework. Maybe you want to learn a language. So remember, even in the first year of college, you're going to be asked to pass a language requirement, which is 1 year of a foreign language. And then, make sure that you have academically focused extracurriculars alongside all of your hobbies and interests. So those are just some takeaways. And then feel free to let me know if you have any questions. I'll get to them in the end. And then you want to demonstrate what we call intellectual vitality or intellectual curiosity. So this means academic involvement both in and out of school illustrates your curiosity or vitality. It's this idea of like a life of the mind, like a curiosity for the sake of curiosity, and a huge hunger to learn, like an insatiable, quest to learn that can't be satisfied by formal coursework alone. So what you can do through your coursework is show us your ambition. So the ability to take classes that are not available at your school or are outside of the school year. They exhibit this kind of student who we call people who are very academically tenacious. So you're taking charge of your own education and you're taking initiative to make sure that you're getting what you need, even though the school doesn't provide it. So it shows us that you are ready to take on the demands of college level coursework. And then when you're choosing electives or academically focused activities outside of school, the ones you select can help us to understand your interest and commitment to a certain area of study, like economics, the social sciences, STEM. And then we like to see that your transcript is strong. Obviously, if your transcript is strong across 4 years, that's way better. But if there's a marked improvement over time and your grades have gone up towards junior and senior year, that's also wonderful. Okay, so in terms of extracurriculars, we at Crimson break extracurriculars down to 3 different buckets. I actually really like these. So you can add value or show leadership in many, many, many different ways. It does not have to be a title like president or CEO. It could be that, okay, in terms of the titles, right, the institutional levels of leadership include things like being the student body president, an organization ambassador, you're the club leader, you're the team captain, or if you're an innovator, maybe you've started up your own company, you've created your own competition, you've created an app, or you're maybe leading a campaign of some sort around a cause that you care about. And then independent forms of leadership include launching your own blog and being very successful, getting a lot of followers, conducting research, producing a successful fundraiser, or doing competitions and internships and work. So your extracurriculars should really help convey who you are outside of the classroom and how you've had an impact not only within the classroom, but within your wider community. So we care about what we call citizen leaders. So people who are going to be really involved in their communities and make a change, because we hope that when you come to our campus, you'll make a similar change. So your extracurriculars communicate to us whether or not you're going to be a fit with our campus and whether you'll be an asset. So meaning how you're going to contribute to our campus culture and community. We're a very dynamic one. We lose a quarter of the community every year. So we're always looking for fresh ideas and fresh interests. And then in terms of extracurricular impact, we're looking for students who can showcase leadership and initiative and the commitment to make an impact on their community. It is very important and has become even more important since the pandemic. So you may have noticed that now there are a lot of questions around diversity and addressing diversity and issues of connecting across difference or making bridges across divides. That's something that's become very important because of the years that we've had post-pandemic, the Black Lives Matter movement, the anti-Asian hate during the pandemic. So lately, schools have been asking for this, schools like Princeton, for instance, and it's always been something very important to both Harvard and Stanford. So impactful extracurriculars demonstrate your passions and then also helps you to leave your mark on a community by showing your influence or effectiveness in that community. So here are some examples of extracurriculars that have an impact at the school, the local, and then the international and national level. So at the school level, you may have raised $5,000 for new library computers. You might have led a tutoring club with 30 tutors supporting 100 peers. You might have been lobbying for things like Meatless Mondays at your school, or maybe the abolishment of school uniforms for girls versus boys. You might have been doing something like increase your involvement in your city by getting membership on the youth council. You might have started a traveling library that reaches underserved communities, or you might have organized a race or a fundraiser for a local charity or a small business. Or you could have launched an educational YouTube channel that reaches national or global audiences, or represented your state or the country at MUN, Model UN, or maybe you won a major academic or STEM or arts competition. Those are all ways to show impact. So when we're looking at successful extracurricular lists, we're looking for things that show intellectual curiosity, for example, research with a professor. We're looking for leadership and initiative. So starting a club, launching your own company, anything like that. You could also have been like the theater crew in the backstage. So maybe not the person in the spotlight, but the person shining light on those in the spotlight. And that's okay too. And that's another way to show initiative and leadership. So remember, right, it doesn't have to be a title. And then we love students who show determination to enhance or improve the lives of others. So that's very important to us. So community service, philanthropy. And then we always encourage students to have 1 or 2 non-school affiliated activities, for example, summer camps or internships, and then make sure that you have activities that around your chosen major, because it's very odd to say, I care so much about climate change or environmental science, and then I look at your activities list and there isn't anything really on there except for a one-time beach cleanup. Okay, so before I dive into the personal essay, I'm going to pause and see if there are any questions about extracurriculars that I can answer. Is starting a charity a good extracurricular? I'm like, yes, of course, if it's something that you care about. Yes, I get this question a lot. So when researching a student or a candidate's online presence, can admissions officers see things the public cannot? Not really. We find what's available. I'm not sure what you mean, the things that the public cannot, but we don't have like a special way of researching or something that wouldn't appear publicly. Let's see, is being in the NHSSS or NHS, I assume that's National Honor Society, impressive or worthy of inclusion? I would say probably yes. So let's see. There's a lot of questions about does sports help? The jobs help? Does getting internship help? I would say yes in all those cases. If it relates to your major, if it's something that you're interested in, definitely. Let's see. There are some questions here about starting a charity, whether that's a good extracurricular. Yes, I would say so. Feel free to keep popping questions in there if you want me to answer them. Otherwise, I'm going to move on to the personal statement. Okay, so at Harvard, they say, while this might seem daunting at first, look at it as an opportunity to write about something that you care about rather than what you think the admissions committee wants to hear. The point of the personal statement is for you to have the chance to share whatever you would like with us. Remember, your topic does not have to be exotic to be compelling. So they're saying to you, make sure that like you're writing about something. It could be something very simple, but what is important is that it's compelling. This is my favorite part of the application because Harvard and Stanford have a lot of essays, and there's a reason why we have a lot of essays. We care a whole lot about them. So in general, right, not specific to Harvard or Stanford, you want to write content that is unique to you, that showcases your personal traits and characteristics. So for example, if you're funny, feel free to be funny. If you're not, you don't have to feel pressure to be funny. Maybe it shows us your resilience, right? If that's something you want to let us know, and then show us, don't tell us. We always say that. What I don't want to see, but I've been seeing a whole lot of, even with my students who are in the process right now, is a list of achievements and accomplishments. So oftentimes my students want to write about that award that they won that's really prestigious. And I usually say, please don't. There's the awards and honors section for that. In the essay, I want to hear about your personal motivations, what led to this award maybe coming about, but I want to hear the story, your story behind it, which is why we say, please don't write about things that are already listed elsewhere. And then now is also the time when really unnecessary, convoluted, ornate language comes out for my students as well, all the SAT words. And I usually say, just write like yourself, be as simple as possible. You don't have to prove to me as an admissions officer how smart you are. I can tell that from what your teachers say about you, from your transcripts and your grades. So don't use the essay as a way to show me how smart you are, academically superior by using big words. Okay. Feel free to pop questions about the essays into the chat. So I'll start with Stanford just because we have such an interesting set of questions. So there's the longer essays are about 250 words long. And there's three main ones. There's the roommate essay. We really are using it to kind of gauge what kind of roommate would you be? Would you be a good roommate? Is this someone who I want in my community or in campus? Would I want to live with this person? We ask you about intellectual vitality by asking you, what makes you genuinely excited about learning? It's a very important quality to us. And then the third thing is we ask you to write about something that's meaningful to you and why, or what matters to you and why. And that one really is open-ended. And then we have what we call the popcorn questions. So these are like the light, smaller questions. For example, what is the most significant challenge that society faces? We care a whole lot about how you spend your summers. So we ask you, how do you spend the last 2 summers? If you said, well, I took the SAT and I took a vacation, that's really not what they're asking here. They want to know, did you challenge yourself? Did you continue your passions? Like how, where, why? And then we ask about a historical moment or event that you wanted to have like witnessed. We ask also to more information about your extracurriculars, and then one thing you're looking forward to at Stanford. So that's kind of all of these things are qualities that we're looking for out of candidates, and we're being quite transparent about it through Stanford prompts. So if you look at it as a whole, right, we're looking for great community members, people who have intellectual vitality, passions that are really meaningful to you, and have you shown us how you've done that outside of the classroom. We want to know that you're going to be a citizen leader, right, by asking you what kind of challenges do you think are the most important to solve? What did you do the last 2 summers? Did you perhaps solve them? And then what historical moment or event? We're looking for proof of intellectual curiosity here. And then why Stanford, right? It's a really tiny why Stanford. It's only 50 words. So let's go over to the Harvard essays, because I think they're also quite telling in terms of the values that they hold true and dear. So they want to hear about one of your extracurriculars or work experiences, but there's also this intellectual life, and it really is all about your intellectual life, not your hobbies. But they ask about one additional intellectual activity that you may not have mentioned or detailed elsewhere. So a lot of students applying to Harvard have this. A lot of students who are trying to apply to Harvard always say to me, but what if I don't have a thing? And that's usually an indication to me that maybe they're not the best fit. But usually Harvard-bound students have a lot of things that they could say here. So it might be things like, if you're a writer or poet or something, you might have had published a chapbook of your poetry somewhere, and this is where you want to talk about it. You might have got to a summer program that maybe wasn't detailed on your activities list because there wasn't room. It may have been research that you did by yourself. There are multiple things that you can put here that showcase your intellectual engagement and intellectual vitality. And then they have this supplemental essay that's like really long. So the Harvard prompts as a whole, there's like 900 words that they're going to be asking you to write about. So they really care about it. And even though it says it's optional, it's actually not. So I would say, please answer it. They have the prompts haven't changed much since I applied to college. And I think we might have them. No. But there's a whole series of different options that you can have in this additional essay. But again, we're looking for fit. And so they're telling you the things that matter to them through the questions that they're asking. Okay, so your letters of recommendation should really serve to back up everything else that you're saying about your file. So usually the teacher should be supporting whatever narrative that you are telling. So you want the whole thing to be coherent, because these letters are being submitted directly through the Common App. And so be careful about who you ask in terms of your teachers. And then your school counselor, you have to ask. But your teachers, I would say, be strategic about who you're asking and who's going to give you the strongest letter. You can also include additional letters. It depends on the school, but from, say, research faculty or coaches or mentors of some sort. So you want to ask them to write you a letter by giving them some context and then a summary, or you might want to show them your essays so that they understand what you're writing about yourself. And then you want to also provide guidance on the points you want them to include. So all the specific anecdotes make for a great letter. So give that to the letter writer when they're writing up your letter of recommendation. That's what I advise my students to do. So I'm going to go into the Q&A. Thank you so much, you guys, for sticking with me. I know there's like roughly 600 of you, so I appreciate you all joining me on this evening, afternoon?
Evening for most of us, not you, but I've actually got a whole lot of questions compiled. I've been kind of scouring the Q&A. You can see we've got almost 150. However, I want to be conscious of the time. So I think we'll jump into the live Q&A, but first I just want to go through our next couple of slides really quickly. And then we'll answer some of these questions because I got a long list of them. So before we get into that live Q&A, I'm about to launch a poll, which is asking if you would be interested in connecting with us after hearing all of this information from Pam and having some of your questions answered. You probably can already discern that the most helpful way to get answers to those questions is going to be to meet with someone like Pam in a one-on-one meeting. So what this poll is asking is whether you'd be interested in connecting with us for that very reason, to whether it be, having someone answer your questions about the schools you're aiming for, or maybe where you're at in your admissions timeline. Primarily, the purpose of this meeting is to help evaluate your candidacy and how they align with your goals, how it aligns with your goals, I should say. So the way I kind of always like to phrase it is the purpose of this meeting is to find out if you were to submit your application today to the school that you're thinking of, what would be your odds of getting in? And if your odds are not as high as you would have hoped, then what can we do between now and hitting submit? Whether that's, a few months from now or a few years from now, what can we do in that time frame to really help boost your candidacy and your odds? So that's the purpose of one of these meetings. Like I said, and also I always do point out, because we get lots of people in these webinars who are very eager to chat with Pam specifically. And we have Pam and many other former admissions officers from, those top caliber schools on our staff at Crimson. But of course, the first touch point in connecting with any of our FAOs is going to be booking one of these calls with us. So if you are interested, again, you can go ahead and click yes in that poll. And now let's just rapid fire fly through these next couple of slides. So get your click and finger ready, Pam. So a little bit more information about Crimson and what we do. If this is your first time joining a webinar with us, you may not know, but we are the world's most successful college admissions consultancy, and we work with students just like you to really perfect their college applications. So that is broken down into these 4 core services, which kind of address every piece of Pam's presentation tonight, actually. So starting with your admission strategy, getting into your academics and how to really polish those up, and then building out your extracurricular profile, and finally developing your essays. So that's kind of a very brief overview of what we do. On to our next slide. This is a comparison of Crimson's Ivy League admit rates that kind of illustrate, obviously we work with students who apply to many, many schools that are not only Ivy League universities, but this kind of illustrates in a nutshell how our approach is really effective, because you can see for each of these Ivy League schools, their general admit rate is, on average right around 4 or 5%. And our acceptance rate at Crimson for Crimson students is much higher than that, usually about 4 to 5 times higher. So something we always love to show and take a lot of pride in. On to our next slide. It's just a breakdown of kind of the static version of those numbers. So these are our all-time results for those Ivy League universities and other top 10s. We, of course, do also work with students interested in top UK universities and other schools around the world. And then I think that's our last slide there. I want to get into our Q&A because I got a lot of questions. So Pam, we'll kind of go in order, starting back from academics, because we had a lot of questions about academics. So, sorry, one second. Let me pull up my little note. Okay, so in the world of academics, in a general sense, what is a student to do if they have lower grades freshman year, maybe sophomore year, and they've got an upward trend on their transcript, but they're really concerned about those less than stellar grades in the earlier years of high school?
So actually, schools like Stanford and the UCs don't even look at, or they don't formally calculate as part of their GPA freshman year. So you would have a bye or like a grace period. And I would say that as long as there's an upward trend, that's really positive, and we would not hold that against you.
Got it. Okay. Another question, which I'm sure you've heard a bunch lately in the last couple of years anyways, is since the SAT and ACT are optional, how important is it to submit them?
I would say that if you're scoring well, some schools have begun requiring them. So Georgetown, MIT, UIUC are a handful of schools that have gone that way. And they're basically saying they want the tests, but if you can, and if you are a high scorer, I would submit them.
Perfect. Okay. Next question, short and sweet. I love it. What are your thoughts on IB curriculum? I suspect this is probably an international student asking, because a lot of the time our international students are worried because they don't have much access to APs. So what about IB? Admissions officers love the IB for the breadth and the depth of the curriculum. So you're in good hands there. Just, make sure you score well. Got it. Okay. And then on the flip side, for our AP students, what is the magic number of AP classes that we should be taking?
There's no magic number or formula because it depends on how many your school offers and then how many you took out of the number that your school offers. So we're very much, I know I'm very well aware that some schools have 4. Some schools have 27. So, you're not going to be judged in the same way, or there's no absolute number that, you must have 15 or 10 or whatever it is. It really depends on what your school offers, and it depends on how many others at your school are taking 10, 12, 15, and because you're being compared against your local context.
Got it. Okay. Moving on to extracurriculars. This person is asking, I don't have a passion project, or as we call it at Crimson, a capstone project, but all of my extracurriculars are consistent with my chosen major and have taken many leadership positions throughout those activities. Am I still a competitive applicant, or is that capstone or leadership project really critical?
No, not everybody needs to have a capstone or a leader, like some huge thing. But if you have other passions, and they're coming out in other ways, that's also okay.
Okay, got it. And then this one kind of has to do with extracurriculars, but it's more about awards and achievements. So how important is it how important is it to have national or international recognition or awards in your application?
It helps a lot to have it. So if you can, I would try to get them, because obviously then you're standing out within your not just local context, but national or international level context.
Got it. Okay. We've got a lot of sort of general questions. So I'm going to move on from extracurriculars now. Let's talk about essays. I see this one a lot in our recent webinars. Using ChatGPT for essays, is this a big no-no, or is it just considered, being being resourceful?
I use ChatGPT a lot, not to write essays, and I'm not writing essays anymore, but I think in terms of college essays, it can provide some sort of general answer to you, but the thing that we're looking most for is introspection and the lessons that you learned. So how you grew and evolved. And I don't know how ChatGPT could tell you how you grew and evolved as a result of doing this activity. So that's my hesitation about ChatGPT and college essays, is that the number one thing is introspection and the lessons learned, and then how you grew as a person. So unless it can do that, I would say that's why it falls short sometimes.
Got it. Love that answer. So another question, are there any, well, it's kind of a two-parter, but are there any essay topics that you think are just overused and unappealing anymore? And secondarily, is the sort of cookie cutter immigrant story a topic like that that's a little overused?
I've definitely read a lot about I don't think there's a cookie cutter immigrant story, but I would say, again, it depends on, there's no topic that's bad or banned or discouraged. It's what do you make of the topic? So how did you grow? How did you learn? How did it change you, right? After this thing that you're talking about? Who were you before that and who were you after that? What was the conflict that you're telling us about? How did you resolve that conflict? I think all those questions are more important than should I write about my immigrant experience or not? And if you can't answer those questions, like I grew and changed because, or this was significant to me because, then maybe you should pick something else.
Got it. Okay. So getting into some of these more general questions, I think this one is really insightful. And someone is asking, colleges provide advice that's hard to apply, like, quote, be yourself. Can you give a specific example of how to be yourself in your application?
Yes. Okay. I'll talk about myself. I saw that question because I usually give the advice, be yourself. So I was never going to be the student with the highest grades of the entire applicant pool. I knew that. But there were a lot of things I was doing that were very important to me that I didn't think to include. But then I engaged with a person like myself, an advisor, and they told me you absolutely should put that on there. I was teaching a lot in prison and when I was applying to school, and it was something that was just very important to me, but I didn't think it was something that I was going to put in my application. But that was very much me being myself. And I was told that it was incredibly unique and I should put it down. So that's kind of what I mean by be yourself, because you might be surprised to find that the thing that you're doing for yourself on your own time is something that actually is very beneficial in your application.
Got it. Okay. So another sort of generalized question, but what would you say are some of the most common mistakes or like biggest red flags when it comes to building your application?
Ooh, that's a little general. Biggest red flags. I would say, obviously this might sound really obvious, but try not to say anything untoward about other groups or identities or ethnicities. That's something that this college is kind of sensitive towards. I would say that's probably a red flag for us. But otherwise, there's no real red flags in that way. I mean, I've seen questions here like, are not having AP classes and transcripts a red flag for Stanford, for instance? And I would say, is that because your local curriculum doesn't offer APs, but otherwise it wouldn't be a red flag?
Got it.
I don't know if I answered the well.
Yeah, I would say so. I think that's a good, or I perceive that to be a good answer to that question. Quick one, sorry, just briefly back to academics, because I want to make sure that the international students attending get the answer to this question. But do Harvard and Stanford, or top colleges in general, do they recognize other curriculum like IGCSE, AICE, Cambridge, international curriculums like those?
Wait, sorry. Say that again.
Do Harvard and Stanford and presumably other, super competitive colleges in the US recognize international curriculums like IGCSE and AICE?
Oh, yes.
So all of those, Cambridge as well.
Definitely. We're very familiar with all of them. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So one question, I really like the way this is phrased, and I'm sorry, I know we're just a couple minutes past. I'm only going to ask a few more, I promise. So when you were on the admissions committee, what was your favorite question to ask when you were on the fence about a candidate and maybe deliberating with others who, trying to make a decision?
Ooh, I don't think there was a thing that I was asking. I mean, maybe where do we see them contributing? Like, where do we most see them adding value to the class? Like, because we're usually the discussions are usually around shaping a class, and what do we need? What kind of spirits, what kind of majors, what kind of identities do we need to round out the class? So then it will be discussions around, okay, who would best do that out of all these candidates? I think is
got it. Okay. Perfect. And then, so kind of similarly, in the general sense, and I see this question on all of our webinars. Is it better to be well-rounded or pointy?
I think it's better to be well lopsided. Or as remember, Ali, I think it was in one of our webinars that somebody said strategically well lopsided. I would say that's how I'd answer that. I thought it was a good answer.
Got it. And then I think this will be our second to last question because I know we're past the hour. So second to last question. I know a lot of people in our audience are students or parents of students at private schools and magnet schools. Do you have a better chance of getting into Ivy League or Stanford or, Ivy adjacent schools if you go to a private high school?
No, not necessarily. There's nothing in preference like that at all.
Got it. Okay. Well, my last question, it's always going to be the same one, and someone else is asking it as well. So I'm going to ask this question, and then I'm going to relaunch our second poll and give you a second to think about it. But if there is one thing that you hope everybody attending this evening will take away from this presentation, or, your single biggest piece of advice for applicants to these top universities, what would that be? So think on that for a second. And to everybody still in the audience, I'm just going to relaunch our question from before, the same question that's going to pop up on your screen. And again, this is just asking if you'd be interested in connecting with us. Unfortunately, it would take us several more hours, I think, to answer the remaining 200 questions in the Q&A, even though we've been sort of feverishly answering them this whole time. So we love your interest, we love your engagement, and we would love to answer those questions for you one-on-one, especially if you've got more specific questions about, your specific circumstances and your specific goals, whether you're an international student or you go to a school that doesn't offer many advanced classes, or, your extracurricular profile is a little bit limited. We'd love to chat about sort of all of those circumstances with you and help you understand how you can sort of course correct if that's your objective, and how you can really make sure to maximize your chances of getting into whatever schools you're applying to. So I'll leave that up right until the end. And Pam, if you don't mind just tapping onto our next slide so that people can read while you answer this final question. These are just our next two upcoming webinars. The first one listed is for our US attendees, and the second one listed is for our Canadian attendees. So Pam, tell us, what is your final piece of advice or key takeaway from this presentation?
I would think about your story. I think storytelling doesn't get talked about as much, but your narrative really matters, and how you put together your application really matters. So start to think about what is my hook and what is my story going to be, and how am I going to put it all together? So I'll leave that with you guys, especially since it is June. And if you're a senior, you should really be in the throes of that question. And if you're in the junior or younger years, I would say start thinking about your story and your narrative.
Awesome. I love that. Well, thanks so much, Pam, for staying the extra couple of minutes. And to everybody else who stuck around a little bit past the hour, we appreciate you staying. And that's all we've got for tonight. We hope to see you in another webinar soon. All right. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining me.
Mhm.
what would you want to say to your wife or husband? What would you want to say to your mom or dad if you passed before them? Like, what are the words that while you were living, as simple as I love you, can you package that up in a platform where it will be delivered on the day you die? You'll assign 3 trustees. So basically, we have people sign up to be people that will push a button when you pass, because the day you die, someone will be informed, and then 3 trustees will be pushing this button by some nuclear code or something like that. And then that day, let's say you have 230 friends, that message goes out to them. Or you could schedule it. You could schedule it to, let's say, Christmas. You could schedule it for a birthday. You could schedule it for an anniversary. I saw the guy in this whole process of learning how to, or not learning, but learning what solutions people were doing on an annual basis. He went to his local florist, and he got the florist to send flowers to his wife every anniversary. This continues to this day after he died. There was a movie made years and years ago in Korea about a guy who died of cancer, and he contacted the local post office. He gave them tons and tons of letters, and then basically they sent these letters manually and stuff. So, do you think you could build that Zilla? Yeah. So the trigger is set up through people signing up. So first off, you have to assign trustees. So you got to, let's say, I say Greg is one of my trustees, you are one of my trustees, and then let's say my brother is one of my trustees. And so the day I die, I will have hopefully uploaded lots of messages and written a lot of different, forms of media that I want delivered to my loved ones, and they will be stored there.